Gentlemen, welcome to this new webinar by Solarplaza. It is truly a bull market for PV and BESS in Italy on the utility scale segment. So let's deep dive in it today. My name is Nicola. I'm just going to share a very few words. I'm going to go with the usual propaganda at the beginning with me, and then I'm going to leave the stage to our speakers. Today is Paolo Rocco Viscontini, frequent flyer Solarplaza, and most notably president of Italia Solare, and Matteo Corleoni, who is head of Italy at Aurora Energy Research. And then we're going to go with the Q&A. The presentation is mostly split on the PV side by Paolo and on the BESS side by Matteo. And we will, of course, leave a lot of time for the Q&A at the end. Quick mention about Solarplaza. You know us probably from all the events and the content which we delivered in the field of once was just PV. Nowadays, of course, also BESS kicked in. And we are all around the world, which means also that on July 9th, we are coming back to Rome for a traditional Solarplaza Summit Italy, PV and storage. So make sure also to register. There's quite a lot of registration, a lot of companies coming in, great market. So I highly encourage you to register with this code. Practical notes. Please send in your questions. We'll try to answer all of them, or at least the majority of them. But please send them. I'll address them to Paolo and Matteo later. If you have any technical issues, please use also the chat box, and we will send you those presentations within 2 days via email. So you will receive everything in your inbox for your review. Now, I will start with the presentation by Paolo Rocco Viscontini. You, of course, know him because he's very often with us at Solarplaza. I think definitely one of the veterans in the PV in the Italian PV market since the probably early 90s. So Paolo, it's always a pleasure to have you. And then we'll follow the presentation by Matteo Corleoni, who is head of Italy at Aurora Energy Research. As you know, Aurora provides a very valuable and I would say essential data to the market, to all IPPs and investors out there. So we'll also be looking at BESS with Matteo later during the presentation. That said, I kept the propaganda as I promised short, so I will leave the stage now to Paolo with his presentation, then Matteo, and then Q&A, and we'll wrap it up within 1 hour. Paolo, the stage is yours.
Thank you, Nicola. Thank you, Solarplaza, for this further invitation. I start immediately giving you an outlook regarding the Italian PV market. It should go on. Sorry, we control. Okay, now it is. And there was a time hysteresis. Sorry, it's taking some time. There was a slide before. It's a little long. Anyway, this is the situation, the trend of the connections in of the PV in Italy. We are now at about 45 gigawatt. You see here all the history. So important part was at the beginning of this graph with the feed-in tariffs. Then a long time with a very weak market when someone was saying that we had to rely on the clean, cheap, and safe gas. Now then things changed, we know, and consequently we registered a further increase of the market. Let's go to the following. Okay, I fear now it's going too fast. So we see here some details about the connection. So we have at the left the total power. You see the different size, different range of power. So the residential is the first the first quarter, practically the orange and the gray is residential, 28%. Then clockwise, we go to the C&I with about 40-45%, and then again another 28% residential, about 40-45, 18, 38, 45% we call C&I, and the remaining 28% is utility scale. We think that utility scale stake will grow. The number is more than 2 million plants, obviously mainly residential. Here we see just one slide regarding residential and C&I as main market drivers, because to someone could be anyway interesting. The residential now is practically always a PV and storage. Before it was obviously only PV. Now storage is almost always associated to the new PV residential system. We have a 50% tax deduction in 10 years. For the C&I, the key points I want to underline in terms of really present topics or issues. One is connected to the new fire brigade guidelines that are limiting the installation of the power that can be installed on the roofs, and there are some difficulties regarding the type of roof associated to the module, and it's something which Italia Solare is quite active now to try to solve these doubts, because there are some doubts in the market with the local fire brigade commands that sometimes can create some problems. So my advice is to pay attention to this point. The second interesting point is the upper depreciation of 180% of the investment in solar if the module is used, if the system is using not only modules made in EU but also cells made in EU. This is one of the first European experience, strong in some way, because only cells made in EU can benefit of this interesting fiscal incentive, and there is only one company that is making the cells so far in Europe. It's 3Sun from Enel. Obviously, this is to support. The intent is to support the factory and maybe also the startup of new, but they will take some time. So there are also some discussions about this point. But it's interesting because it's one topic that we have to take into consideration. It will become more and more important in the next weeks and months in all Europe regarding the let's say made in EU. Then we can open a discussion on that made in EU that is not easy to use. These are the numbers of the utility scale. You see in blue the systems between 1 and 10 megawatt, and in yellow above 10 megawatt. We have around 12 gigawatt, 12.5 gigawatt, and the number is about 2,800 systems in total. The majority is of the system between 1 and 10, and 169 are the systems above 10 megawatt. So more and more bigger systems are connected to the grid. In fact, we are assisting to the increase of the average power of the systems above 10 megawatt, because it reached 30 megawatt. That for Italy is quite important. And this was the cumulative. What is the situation in the first quarter of this year? We registered the connection of 159 plants in total of systems above 1 megawatt, and you see how they are divided. And in megawatt, it's 560 megawatt. So this is the power of about 1.5 gigawatt installed in total. 1/3 is of utility scale. Here we can see the in the different quarter, by power class, actually more than capacity, the installations, how they are moving quarter after quarter. And we see that, as usual, at the end of the year, you see Q4 2025, a rapid, well, a strong share is for the bigger systems, because there is always a rush at the end of the year to close the plants. And so you can see the different power that you see in details in the bar under this graph, how they are covering the whole market. Then you will receive all these slides. Interesting, we elaborated the data of the energy market price. This in particular is the average for last year, 2025, of the hourly day ahead market prices. And you see different curves. The blue one, the thicker one, that is a little on the higher part of the curves, is the national single price index we call PUN, Prezzo Unico Nazionale. And then we just selected a few curves more significant related to the market where the price is going down quite significantly. The lowest one is Sardinia, and then there is Central. The blue one is Central South. South, obviously. South Italy, we have less consumption but more installations, and this is pushing down the zonal price. These are the zonal price of the southern regions. This is an average, but if we look at some more specific data, we realize that there are more and more hours in Italy too, not at the level of Spain or also other countries, in which the price is very low, even zero, or in Italy we don't have negative prices so far. Or we have a very low price, 20, 30. And this is obviously a problem for the asset owners. But we expect that this curve will be levelized by the installations of the big batteries, big BESS that are under preparation, both in the authorization side and some already in the realization, so in the real installation. Here we see since January 21 the monthly average price that then became also PUN index, and obviously we see this gap from the still today, well, actually end of last year, average price for the users is 100, more than 100 euro per megawatt hour. That is quite high, while we have the shape of the curve that we saw before for the also for the that are with much lower prices in the sunny hours for the asset owners. And I will say later something important regarding this further topic. Go on. Okay. Talking about utility scale. Oh, sorry, because it took in memory my further touch. And so which are the main topics we have to keep in mind when one is active or is interested in entering in the Italian market? The suitable areas at a regional level is now the most important topic. We are also as association very active region by region to monitor and to try to support politicians to make better laws. By the end of June, all the regions should publish the new law. And to be very, very practical only agrivoltaic plants will be possible in the agricultural land, and it's very interesting what can be done in the agricultural land that are close to the industrial area. We call solar belt, and because in this area the authorization process can be a little simpler, then there can be some differences in the regions, and the distance is 350 meters, and it can be interesting because the reason also of this law is because it's created the opportunity for the industrial area, so for the factories, to buy cheap energy from these PV plants. And this is quite important because it's possible even to make a physical connection with these plants for the different factories, and in this way they can save a lot of money, considering they have not to pay the grid cost. Oh no, sorry, I forgot the second half of the slide. I'm going back again, please. Okay. Excuse me. Next, installations. So what are the installations we foresee for the next months or few years? First of all, already 10 gigawatt has been assigned in the FERX, of which about 1.2 gigawatt are NZIA contingent. So it means with some you're not Chinese actually at the end origin of the module. 1.1 gigawatt agrivoltaic plants, and 1 gigawatt it's another market that is under construction, practically mainly for farmers with high subsidies. We are waiting the new FERX, should be around 20 gigawatt. So a lot of systems must be installed in Italy in the next 2-3 years, I would say. So more than 30 gigawatt could take place, besides then also the C&I and residential. And this will be a big change also for our energy situation, energy supply situation. Going to the batteries, or the storage. Here we can see how many gigawatt hour we have associated with solar systems. We are at 11.5, and basically residential. And the standalone systems are growing quite fast because they reached already 7 gigawatt hour. So we have in Italy already more than 18, almost 19 gigawatt hour of big batteries. In 2026, we connected to the grid half a gigawatt hour for a power of 237, for a total number of systems of 33,000. Again, majority are small associated to the small PV systems, and this is in fact related to the not the standalone, just the PV, the storage associated to PV systems. Which are the main market drivers? We're going to the end, close to the end. We have two major drivers. One is the capacity market, and the other is MACSE. Capacity market is open also to other technologies, and we expect, actually, sorry, I didn't correct, is about 3 gigawatt hour already assigned. And regarding the MACSE, well, probably most of you already know, last year we had the 10 gigawatt hour of tender assigned. This year, by the end of the year, we should have a further 16 gigawatt hour, and a further 32 gigawatt hour will be assigned in the following tenders. So there is still quite a big space, even if the connections requests are quite high. From the PV side, we consider it as an opportunity, the transition from the average price, national average price, that is the average of all the single area, to the zonal price. It's an opportunity because it will make understand people that the presence of PV and storage it will really affect the convenience of their electricity bill. Then the flexibilities will enter hopefully during this year in the Italian market as well. The authority has to work on that. And FERX is under preparation, probably will be next year. And it's a different type, always a CFD, but with different rules, with a strike price that is bid by the investors at the beginning, with a quantity of energy that is guaranteed, and then day by day the asset owner shall try to follow up to follow the curve of requested by GSE every day. And so it will be dedicated, the FERX, not only to solar, but for sure solar plus storage. It will be not enough. So who has also wind can exploit well wind, or trader can help to cover this curve. So the challenges for us are always the acceptability of ground-mounted PV systems and the network infrastructure. In fact, regarding the network infrastructure, we have more than 300 gigawatt of request of connection for renewables, of which PV are 144, and also more than 300 of storage. So obviously these are crazy numbers. Only a part will be realized. There is an issue regarding the virtual saturation of the grid, but it will be solved with the new regulation that is now under preparation by ARERA, our authority, that will give priority to the systems that are authorized. And I think I finished. Oh yeah, just one word. We are very proud to inform you that next week, no, 25, we start with the national campaign communication, very important, also on television, to communicate the importance of solar as a real solution to reduce the electric bills, to increase also the acceptability of solar, both television, press, newspaper, radio, so a lot of social. So we give our contribution to our solar target. Thank you very much.
Okay. And Paolo, fingers crossed, because you guys are doing a lot also with that in Italy. So fingers crossed. Okay, Paolo, thank you very much. Don't run away, because Paolo will stay for the questions. But now we'll move to the slides by Matteo Corleone of Aurora Energy Research, and let's move a bit more into the BESS side of today's world. Matteo, stage is yours.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Thanks a lot, Nicola, and thanks a lot to Solarplaza for the opportunity to speak today. Yeah, hopefully this will be an interesting follow-up to the presentation by Italia Solare. First, I would like to spend just a couple of words on who we are as Aurora Energy Research. If you don't know us, we are a leading global provider of power market analytics. We originated, let's say, out of Oxford, initially founded by a consortium of Oxford professors, but then we expanded to basically try to become a, let's say, a reference voice for power market modeling and power market consulting across the globe. And so now we operate out of 17 different offices, and I have the privilege of leading our Italian practice out of our office in Rome. Before getting into what makes, let's say, interesting the Italian power market, I wanted to show a little bit why we think that it is indeed attractive and how it stacks against different markets across Europe. So as Aurora, we try every year to assess the attractiveness for investors of both renewables and storage technologies across Europe. And for the third year in a row, we found that Italy should be considered a top 3 market for investor attractiveness in Europe, this year together with Germany and GB. And we do this by trying to look at different factors like the expected market size. Of course, if you have very high returns, but it's only there for the first gigawatt of projects, then that may not be super attractive for an investor. But we also look at what are the different revenue streams available, what are the business models, and the overall policy environment. This is our assessment. So Italy, good, attractive, but the market seems to back it up. I won't spend too much time on this slide as some of this data was already covered, but you can see that over the last few years, there has been a real increase in both authorized BESS projects, but also grid connection requests for further, let's say, early development projects. If we look at the authorizations, these data are slightly older. They come from our research from October 2025, but already there we had 8 gigawatts of battery projects that had obtained all the required authorizations over the previous 4 years, and so they were ready for the different auction rounds to come. And these BESS projects were heavily concentrated in the southern provinces. As you can see, Puglia was by far the region with the highest concentration of authorized projects, even though the let's say the crown for the top individual province was Caserta. We also saw that in addition to these 8 gigawatts, further 9.5 gigawatts as of October 2025 were in the process of getting the necessary approvals, and again, dominated by projects in South. And as already mentioned, over 300 gigawatts of further projects have requested grid connection. Clearly, not all these projects are what the president called serious projects in his presentation, but still, I think it's an interesting metric of the attractiveness that is perceived not just by analysts such as ours, but also by real, let's say, real market developers and investors for the battery space in Italy. So what makes Italy unique in a way? And I think a factor is definitely that Italy, differently from other European countries, has multiple routes to markets that can drive battery development. The two main ones are, on the one hand, MACSE, which, as you likely know, is not only a government-run program dedicated to storage, but is attractive as it is heavily contracted. Basically, you enter into a sort of tolling agreement with Terna. You get a contract, a long-term contract for 15 years. There is a small exposure for upside on merchant markets, but overall, this is an heavily contracted business model. The second one is capacity market plus energy trading, and this is, let's say, the most traditional business model also in other countries. Basically, it's a business model predicated on revenue stacking. You try to get your capacity market contract, 15-year contract that doesn't provide necessarily the bulk of your revenues, but it creates a, let's say, floor that can be useful for financing. And we will discuss that much more in depth in a minute. But then the real profitability also to the equity comes from operating the battery in the different energy markets, such as the wholesale market, the intraday market, ancillary services. And by the combination of the operation in these different markets, you get to attractive returns and high total revenues. A third route to market, which can be considered both complementary and alternative to the previous two, is represented by offtake agreements. Essentially, the idea is that in order to ensure that the project has a higher share of contracted revenues out of your total revenues, which is enticing for lenders, as that is a main metric, let's say, of that they would look at when doing, debt sizing on projects. You try to increase your contracted revenues share by entering into a private offtake agreements. And these type of agreements can take, since they're private contracts, can take different shape and forms, such as very similar to renewable PPAs. There are different contractual clauses that can be object of negotiation. The three main designs of tolling agreements that we have seen in the market over the last few months are, let's say, the traditional tolling agreement with fixed price. So you get a fixed revenue share in exchange for the variable revenue shares of the asset. There are more sophisticated versions of these that basically operate with a cap and floor, or with a floor plus a percentage sharing of the upside. between the two parties. But there are also agreements that are becoming more common, which basically function as purely financial instruments, and spread swaps are one example. So basically, the battery owner and a counterparty define an index usually tied to the volatility of the day-ahead markets, and based on that index, the BESS owner receives a fixed revenue and it pays back the volatility on this index. But again, overall, is the combination of these three that is quite unique to Italy. And here we have basically compared a little bit these three models of three route markets in terms of potential return on the investments, on the bankability of the route market, so how these business models are palatable to lenders. And we also tried to see how that changed before and after the first MACSE auction that took place in September 2025. As you can imagine, each model presents to investor a different risk-return profile, and that depends on the prevalence of contracted revenues and also on the quality of these contracted revenues. So if you look at capacity market, that has been the main, let's say, the first big route to market for batteries. In the first few rounds of the capacity market, clearing prices were quite high. And as such, these contracts provided a very high revenue floor, but still keeping market exposure for upside. And so the returns for these batteries were potentially very, very attractive. The bankability was also good in the sense that these contracted revenues were high. However, they would not be enough on their own necessarily to basically ensure a high leverage. And this situation has become tighter, let's say, on the capacity market after the MACSE auction, because in the first MACSE auction, a large contingent of battery participated, but only a few won. And so there are a lot of projects out there that are eager to enter into a contract with the government, and this will drive increased competition in the capacity market, lower prices, and therefore the capacity market on its own will lower its contribution to bankability. MACSE, even though it's another type of government program predicated on capacity contracted revenues, is quite a bit different when it comes to the balance between returns and bankability. I think that when MACSE was first announced, it was received very enthusiastically by the market. It was clearly a scheme with a very high potential for bankability, extremely high contracted revenues on the long-term minimal merchant exposure. And so it would be very interesting and enticing for banks to lend money against it. And I think that the perception, at least, let's say, until early last year, was also that the returns could be quite good if the developers would be able to, let's say, optimize their cost. However, in the months leading to the auction, the expectation for the clearing prices decreased dramatically. It was clear that the competition was much stronger than expected, as there was also a surge in authorized projects. As such, the clearing prices for the MACSE were very low overall compared to most marketplace expectations. And as such, the bankability of the scheme remains. However, the returns for the investors are a bit compressed. Tollings were a bit of an unknown, let's say, before the MACSE auction, not really a widespread topic in the Italian market. But since then, we've seen a great acceleration in the interest of tolling agreement, as in MACSE, a lot of batteries didn't win a contract, and as such, there was quite an interest in trying to sign a contract to get a bankability boost to couple with a capacity market contract. And so what I will quickly show is how different business models predicated around these three types of contracted revenues can be compared in terms of returns to, let's say, project returns, equity returns, and gearing. One aspect that first, before getting into the financial metrics, I think is important is that if you look at these slides, there are cases with capacity market plus tolling, and just tolling. And here we assume that an optimal configuration, of course, this would depend heavily on the specific location, the specific project, but on average, you can think of 4 hours as being the go-to, let's say, duration for your project. And it's hard to imagine a project larger than 50 megawatt being, let's say, necessarily a good idea, especially if you want to go for the capacity market, as the capacity market will have, let's say, quite low space for new capacity to win. So the larger it is your project, the more you're exposed to potentially not getting, a contract on your entire capacity. For MACSE, on the other hand, given that the optimizing your merchant operation is not, let's say, shouldn't be a priority. The priority is to minimize your cost per megawatt hour to be competitive in the auction. The bigger you can make your project, you can try to extract bigger economies of scale and scope. And so here we assume more projects that are closer to 8 hours, closer to 100 megawatt duration. So the impact that the consequences of MACSE were essentially that people were, as mentioned, more interested in coupling capacity market and tolling agreements to get financing. However, while it is true that tolling agreements can increase your ability to access debt and to increase the gearing of the project, the impact on the returns for investors are a bit more ambiguous and depend on how good the merchant economics of a project look like. In these charts, you can see in North, Center, South, and Sicily, how the economics of a project that has a capacity market contract change when you add on top of that a fixed tolling agreement based on the prices that are the current, let's say, market quotes. And you can see that in all cases, you have that the gearing is able to increase from a relatively low level to at least 60%. Project returns, so the intrinsic value of the revenues that the asset generates, decreases because the value of these tolling agreements, of course, has a discount compared to what is the amount of revenues that you could get on a merchant basis. Essentially, the off-taker is making you pay for the revenue security. With equity IRR, we basically are able to measure this trade-off. And you can see that in the North, where the economics on a trading basis are a bit less attractive than in the South, overall this trade-off also on equity returns is positive. In Center South is actually negative because the trading is very, very attractive in the area. While for Sicily, the two effects cancel each other out mostly, with the implication being that in the areas where you can get higher leverage, then you can also go for bigger projects, while in the areas where this equity IRR actually decreases, you can try maybe to go for a lower size projects so that you are less in need of debt for the same amount of equity and try to conserve some of the equity returns. I mentioned that that analysis was done on the basis of the current market quotes for tolling agreements. And I think that this is a key issue that we're having in the market right now. On the left-hand side, this chart shows 3 key levels that we should keep in mind when evaluating whether a price for a tolling agreement is attractive or not. The first one is, what is the off-taker willingness to pay? The second one is, what is the asset owner minimum acceptable price, which usually will be tied to either how much contracted revenues they need to get a certain threshold of basically debt sizing, or this first consideration coupled with, I want to still maintain a certain minimum level of equity IRR. The market quotes which is the gray bar on the right, at the lower ends of the spectrum of macro quotes that we observe, they are sometimes below this threshold of the owner's minimum acceptable price. And this is due to the MACSE auction clearing at very low prices, creating a B2B reference point for off-takers that are essentially going to asset owners that have lost the MACSE auction and saying, look, this is the price that was awarded to winning projects. Why should I pay more than that? On the right-hand side, though, you can see that if we move from this red area, where we are right now in terms of market quotes, to the blue area, which is where an efficient market would be. So with tolling prices that are between the minimum acceptable price for the owners and the willingness to pay of the off-takers, then the positive impact of tolling agreements on equity IRR will be 2.6% higher, and you also will be able to go from 50% gearing to 60% gearing. So this is just to show that there is a little bit of an inefficiency in the tolling agreements market. And once this inefficiency sorts itself out with prices slightly higher, then the full benefits of tolling agreements on project economics and the ability to bring into the market more projects will be able to be perceived. We've talked about tolling agreements. A final point on this is, given that the current tolling agreement levels are low, capacity market contracts become essential also to, let's say, protect these returns. So in a way, we are in a bit of a situation where the main challenge is that with the current prices on the tolling markets and the expected prices on the capacity market prices alone can grant you a relatively low level of gearing based on the contracted revenues prevalence, and tolling agreements only are not enough to ensure attractive equity returns if not coupled with a capacity market contract. And so you can see, for example, that if we wanted to have an asset that achieves a certain threshold of contracted revenues and shows also a good level of profitability, we would need to have a tolling price that is around 40% higher than what you can observe in the market right now. And of course, that's clearly an issue. Finally, I wanted to quickly mention MACSE. As already mentioned, the first MACSE auction cleared at relatively low premium, but it remains a very solid path to financing given the high prevalence of contracted revenues. However, this comes a little bit at the cost of limiting the returns. So on the left-hand side, you can see a comparison between the project IRRs and equity IRRs of a MACSE project versus a project with a capacity market and a tolling agreement. And you can see that capacity market plus tolling outperforms MACSE by more than 2 percentage points, also on an equity basis. However, the situation could change quite substantially depending on the outcomes of the next MACSE auction. So you can see on the chart on the right, basically how the project returns, equity returns, and the implied gearing would change based on what is the MACSE premium. So if we increase, for example, from 16 to 18 the premium, so by just €2 per megawatt hour, you get that the equity returns are 2 percentage points higher, and you also unlock around 10 percentage points of additional gearing. The final slide on my side is I also wanted to quickly mention collocation as to tie back to the conversation on the solar market, because in addition to these 3 routes to markets that we've discussed so far, collocation is an entirely, let's say, different ways of thinking about batteries, but that will also be a key way for bringing additional storage capacity into the system. And BESS collocation with solar PV can both enhance project value and reduce risk exposure compared to a standalone case. And I think what these slides try to show, and this comes from an action analysis that we did for a project that we were supporting the discussion with the banks for financing. We were asked to try to disentangle the different ways in which adding a battery to a solar project would, let's say, create value. And there are three main ways. One is additional revenues from volumes that would otherwise be curtailed. And so we know that curtailment will become more and more of an issue in the future. Co-located battery can make sure that you can charge up the battery at no opportunity cost, as that power would have gone to waste otherwise. The biggest, let's say, reason why co-location creates value is that it makes the same megawatt hour produced by the solar asset have a higher implicit value through time shifting, basically. The traditional, let's say, the most intuitive idea of what co-located battery, you charge it in the middle of the day and discharge that power at night. The final component of value is that a battery allows the asset to do things that a standalone solar wouldn't be able to do. And so more actively trading in markets that are not the day ahead, such as the intraday and the ancillary services markets, is an opportunity that the BESS can unlock for a PV system. And with that, I'm done. I know that the slides will be circulated, and that is why I have included a takeaway slide, but no need to go through that now. Thanks a lot.
Matteo, thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for a lot of precious information. Okay, so now, as promised, let's go to the Q&A, and I encourage also the audience sending your questions. There's quite a lot, so I'll start filtering them a bit. Probably some for you, Paolo, and some for you, then Matteo. Maybe Paolo, then let's start with you. First one relates to the size of PV systems in Italy, and why do we see so few projects over 30 megawatts on the market so far, in your opinion? What's the main reason behind it?
For sure, the main reason is related to the kind of territory we have in Italy and the high density of population. So Italy is not like Spain, where there are large areas with very few villages, or one village after the other, with quite a long distance of in kilometers. Italy, if you know Italy, if you drive also in South Italy, you see a few areas, you see one village after the other, every 1-2 kilometers maximum, of different sizes. Obviously, bigger are a little more distant, but many small. And this is affecting for sure the possibility of the development of large areas, large plants. The exceptions are in Sicily. There are areas in central Sicily that are quite big and not populated. And indeed, in these areas, there are some projects that are bigger, that are much higher than the average. So even 100 or 200 megawatt, there are some. A few are approved and done, but something is happening. In general, the countryside with the flat areas are quite populated, and then there are mountains, obviously, that are all around Italy, that are limiting the space for very large projects.
Very clear. Let's move a bit into the topic of the grid now. Maybe Matteo, you can answer on the side of BESS, and perhaps Paolo, you are more on the side of PV. What do you think will be the impact when it comes to the reforms related to grid connection conditions in Italy? How will they impact the development of PV and BESS? Perhaps we can start with Matteo, if you agree, on the BESS side, and then Paolo, you can maybe complement it on the PV side.
Yeah, I think overall this is a definitely a big topic for traditional renewable assets rather than storage. Of course, there is a, let's say, a procedural aspect of it. So the project that will need to restart the ITER after the reform, even if, also if they are BESS, they of course are exposed to a risk having to reset, let's say, the overall procedure. However, when it comes to the reason why such a reform exists is, on the one hand, to make sure that the development process becomes faster and more efficient, but also because if you look at the experience of other countries, after a certain threshold of renewable assets in the system, inevitably some risk of curtailment and things like that becomes more prevalent. And so this reform is also a step to try to manage the system in a bit more of an active way when it comes to that. The curtailment risk is not that big of a risk for batteries. It can even be an upside or a way to mitigate it.
From my side, I can say that this is quite a big issue, big topic discussed by certainly by the PV and storage developers and investors. The concern is quite high because many systems that are slow because of the of inefficiency of the public administration, now they risk to lose the connection. This is the reality. And so, as you can imagine, many investors are quite scared about this situation because they invested a lot of money in the investment. The point is that I said that they lose the connection is not true. Well, they risk to lose that connection. Then the process allows to change the connection point. The risk is that is farther, so there will be more cost, some more development work for the connection works, or also connection works authorization, and but the problem is quite well known, associated to the Italian development of large projects, the uncertainty regarding times, but fortunately, it's not always like that. There are projects that are going on, and this will be, I don't say more lucky, but at the end they will arrive sooner at the connection. By the other side, I can assure you that as an association, we work on all the range of power from residential C&I and up to large utility scale projects. I can tell you that there are areas in which it's difficult to connect even a small PV system for this we call virtual saturation, because the risk, the reality is that the grid is saturated by something that is not existing, and who knows when this capacity will really be reserved and used. And this has an impact also in the new industrial areas in some situations. So even because we are used to talk about solar, BESS, wind, and so on, but if one needed to make a new factory and or enlarge the power of its factory, well, they can receive a negative answer or an answer. Well, the answer is never negative. They always say yes, but in X days, according to the works that must be done in the for the grid.
Yes.
And the risk is that even the industries can be paralyzed. So they had to do something. Then the key point was what I said at the beginning: the suitable areas from the regions and many steps in the authorization process that we also, as an association, we worked hard to identify, to highlight the critical points to the Minister of Energy. Sometimes we solve, sometimes it takes time, and we go on. Sorry for that, but this is our reality. It's not everything clear and simple.
Yeah, indeed. And gentlemen, let's move on the topic of agri PV combined with BESS. One of the questions that we have, if in your opinion, economically and time-wise, it is better to develop an agri PV project under BESS standalone next to it, or will you directly advise to go for a hybrid solution, so co-located project? What would you opt for in the market today?
Yeah, maybe I can take that. I think that so the answer is not necessarily limited to agri PV. I think it's a more general question that you can have also on PV, and this is a question that we deal with a lot. At the end of the day, I think that on the one hand, co-location doesn't magically create value for a solar project, and so if the best project wouldn't have been economically viable on somewhat of a standalone basis in that area, then it doesn't become a great investment if you put it together with a solar asset. And so the two things are not necessarily completely different, doing them co-location or doing them standalone but close. I think that the standalone test is one that the BESS needs to, let's say, overcome. It is good to have them co-located when you think that you can exploit significant savings on the cost side. And so there are savings on land, there are savings on the connection. So depending on the size of the cost that you abate by co-locating, one is better than the other. Usually co-located is better than the two standalone assets, but we're not talking about worlds apart, let's say.
Okay, Paolo, I don't know, maybe if you want to add, or perhaps we can move to the new another question, and then perhaps also wrap up the webinar. One actually relates to storage technologies, because we're talking about a lot about BESS today, and probably that's kind of the golden mantra for everything. But do you see perhaps room for thermal energy storage, or perhaps heat power, or is there room for that in the market, or will BESS take the lion's share over the next years?
I will admit that I'm not an engineer, I'm an economist, so I don't know the technological developments of all these different technologies. However, from an economics perspective, it is clear that at least now, let's say battery energy storage is much more efficient in terms of cost. I think the challenge, what the hope, I think, could be, if you really want to see a more diverse type of technology mix, if there are technologies that are able to go much longer, let's say on more on the seasonal storage side. Because if we are talking about the daily time shifting, for now, BESS is by far the most efficient.
Okay. The market is going to this direction. We don't see other technologies involved at the same level, or even neither far from what we see of the electrochemical battery. Then, as you know, there is a continuous improvement in the electrochemical storage that is interesting, and it will help for sure to also the economics of the projects that now are under development, because the projects are quite long, not less than 2-3 years, and in 2-3 years, you know very well how things can change in the storage industry.
Indeed. So I think with that said, I promised also to everyone that we will stay within the hour. So probably we won't take some more questions, but probably we could use 1 more hour on top of that. So Paolo, Matteo, thanks a lot for your contribution. Thanks also for those of you who joined today. I remind you that we'll see each other hopefully, if you decide to join, but we welcome you on July 9th in Rome for Solarplaza Italy. So make sure also to register. And I think, well, I'm sure that Paolo and Matteo will also be there. So we'll see each other in Rome in a few months. And thanks a lot for your contributions today, gentlemen.
Thank you to you. See you in Rome.
Take care.
Thanks a lot. Have a good one.
Bye. Bye.